the drive here, Raederle had a pretty interesting insight about me and socializing. I have a lot of difficulty feeling like I'm part of what's going on, really relating to the people around me, and part of the conflict mainstream tends to be into this pop culture, understanding all this trivia about celebrities, what movies certain people were in, and how their acting career evolved over time, and all this like stuff that to me seems superfluous and uninteresting. Raederle had this interesting insight that there's a category of people that he thinks of as geeks, and part of geek culture is like playfulness. There's board game geeks, and there's video game geeks, there's role-playing geeks, but all of these things have to do with being playful. And there's even pop culture geeks, and there's like a playfulness in the watching of the movies, the thinking about the movies, the talking about them with other people, the inside jokes that come out of that, the memes that come out of that. Knowing all of that and figuring out how they fit together can be a very attractive thing to this category of people. They like it, they connect over it, they feel like they're, woven together from it. Whereas when other people are doing this, I tend to feel excluded, but it's definitely a chosen exclusion. I'm sharing the realization that you had, the camera. Oh. Then Raederle gave me the definition of what he thinks of as a nerd. Not that these are official definitions of geeks and nerds.
The Webster Dictionary gives 3 definitions of geek, including a person often of an intellectual bent who is disliked, and an enthusiast or expert, especially in a technological field or activity, such as a computer geek. Dictionary.com includes a 4th definition: a peculiar person, especially one who is perceived to be overly intellectual, unfashionable, or socially awkward. Also, it can be used as a verb. I geek out about Myers-Briggs for hours at a time. But I personally like what Urban Dictionary has to say best: the people you pick on in high school and wind up working for as an adult. For the purposes of this video, we're using geek to represent a concept that doesn't already have its own word, but this concept is related both to having enthusiastic interest in a particular field and to being someone who resides more at the fringes of mainstream rather than within it. For context, almost everyone significant in my life is either a geek or a nerd. In this video, geeks are people who relish many creations that come from mainstream, generally including modern technology, but also tend to feel that mainstream doesn't know how best to fully engage in a lighthearted enjoyment of these said creations. The Webster Dictionary has this to say for nerds: a person devoted to intellectual, academic, or technical pursuits or interests, or an unstylish or socially awkward person. Dictionary.com mostly agrees, except that it asserts that nerds possess not just a devotion to their interest, but a single-minded, non-social obsession. The most popular definition on Urban Dictionary is one whose IQ exceeds his weight. Using either the more conventional definitions or the specialized ones we're using today, geeks and nerds are both more interested in knowledge for knowledge's sake than they are in practical application, with geeks being more likely to congregate socially and bond through their interests.
That concept of a nerd as more like an intellectual, studious, interested in understanding something very deeply. And what they understand very deeply could include something like pop culture or board games or whatever. But it tends to be more about like, what are the statistics involving this? What's the scientific significance? What's the value in this for humanity? And I belong to that second category. I don't mind people being geeky, but it's like I want them to be nerdy about the things they're geeky about too. It's like if you're gonna tell me about an actor, tell me something really interesting about them. So for example, I learned that there's such a thing as copycat suicides from celebrities. If a celebrity commits suicide, there's a whole rash of suicides among their following afterwards. And this kind of information I find fascinating. It has a lot of implications about psychology and society and groups of people in general. It implies a lot about fame and influence. That kind of information is very interesting to me. I can't even give you an example of the type of information that's not interesting to me because it goes in one ear and out the other. There's no reason you can't be both. You can be interested in the intellectual things as well as the sort of just fun and playful things. Why do I exclude myself from the geeks? Partly has to do with my own lack of integration around being playful. I've improved a lot in this area in the last 5 years, dramatically, and that's largely because of my relationship with Greg. He's very, very much on the playful side. He very much wants to be part of the group and connecting with all the memes and all the things. My playfulness got banished from myself when I was younger because my parents were kind of disapproving from it because their own playfulness is not integrated, and they themselves also are the type of people who don't really vibe in a circle that's talking about pop culture. They liked gaming, but like serious gaming, and then they liked discussions with people, but only serious discussions. And so I grew up with a lot of seriousness, and I internalized that as like the right way to be. And I also take a lot of pride in it. So Latenian pointed out that there's two things that prevent me from feeling like I'm, connecting with other people. And one of those things is my own sense of pride, because I feel like it's just wasteful. And I want to disclaimer this, that this is pride speaking, and there's some anger in here, and the anger is a cover emotion for fear. The anger has to do with the sense that there's wastefulness, a wastefulness that I get distracted every time Latenian walks in carrying a bag. Waste really, really bothers me. I take a lot of pride in being somebody who's not wasteful, and wastefulness is not just about material resources, it's about emotional resources. So sometimes I will decide that the emotional cost of something is so high that it's worth it to be wasteful of physical resources in favor of emotional resources, and vice versa. So I find that most pop culture is just an extreme waste of emotional resources, particularly in my case. Maybe other people don't find it so wasteful, but to me, I need to get something out of what I've just watched. The book I've read, the movie I've watched, I want to feel something meaningful has been gained for my investment of effort and time in order to engage with that media. Obviously, the same applies to YouTube. Because of this sense that I don't want to waste my time or my energy or my effort engaging with something, I actually feel like it's the responsibility of the author or the movie maker to create something worthwhile, something of value. They need to consider the reader or the watcher when they're creating their media, so that they know what they're offering is going to provide the watcher or reader with something that they will carry with them. I tend to feel disappointed if I watch an action movie and there was nothing of substance during the entire movie, and I'll just forget about it like a week later. It actually amazes me that other people can hold on to it. So stepping out of my own personal pride thing for a moment, I can understand that there obviously is some value, otherwise people would not remember it, they would not be able to connect over it, they would not be able to engage with it so deeply. I just obviously personally don't experience that value. But then again, I was able to pinpoint a second reason besides my pride that keeps me from connecting in a group of people when they're talking about something like pop culture, but also just in general, just a sense of distance between me and the group, like I'm not part of the hive. That part's a little bit harder to explain. I have an aspect of myself that I call Agatha. One of probably my least understood and least integrated parts, that at least that I'm even aware of. There could be other parts I'm not aware of. Agatha, I don't know that I really want to get into this in this video because I feel like that would be like a whole video by itself. And also I don't completely understand it yet. But this part of me uses horror imagery to freak me out in order to get my attention, in order to get some kind of sense of affection from like the rest of me that is closed off to that part of me named Agatha. I didn't understand this obviously for most of my life, so when I used to get this imagery when I was a kid, I didn't know if like maybe a demon was trying to possess me. I didn't know if I was just traumatized from having watched a horror movie. I didn't know what was going on. I just knew that these images would show up in my head and I would feel extremely afraid. But bringing me into the state of intense emotion, bringing me into that state of intense fear would bring my central self closer to Agatha, which would make Agatha feel less lonely. So Agatha is this part of me that feels chronically isolated from the outside. I don't really come forward and express this part of myself externally. Part of the reason why Agatha leads to me being more isolated from other people is because Agatha is so isolated from the rest of myself. So I've already got chronic isolation that I am experiencing at a baseline level within myself all the time. And because nobody can penetrate that, because I have a part of myself that's so isolated and alone, that gets mirrored in my external experience with other people. All of this isn't to say that I don't enjoy socializing with my friends. Obviously I do, otherwise I wouldn't do it. I'm not like a total hermit who just shuns people. I just am more aware of my own level of internal conflict than most people. I think a lot of people feel chronically isolated when they're in groups of other people and they just aren't really aware of what's going on, and their personal dynamic might be very different from mine. So if you feel isolated when you're with a group of friends, it might have nothing to do with pride. Maybe it might have to do with having a fragment of yourself that's chronically isolated from the rest of you. That seems pretty likely. But your chronically isolated part probably is very different from my Agatha. The chances are that you do have a highly isolated part of yourself that is being mirrored externally. The specifics, however, it's gonna vary. This leads to the obvious question, what can be done about it? I know in my case what I need is more integration. That's why I do so much consciousness alchemy. Most of us have a lot of fragments, but I feel like my level of fragmentation definitely was unusual, and my level of being resourceful and learning about how to integrate has also been unusually high, which puts me in the unusual position of having experienced extreme fragmentation and extreme integration. So for me, I think integrating a sense of playfulness and working more on my pride is going to help me a lot with feeling more connected with other people. I actually noticed on this trip when visiting and playing board games with friends that I actually do feel more connected to them than I have in the past. In the past, I've often experienced an incredibly deeply painful sensation of like being excluded even when I'm there, even when I'm part of what's happening and nobody's excluding me at all, but I've still felt deeply excluded just by people's mannerisms. And I noticed that that's begun to shift in a pretty big way. That I have a sense that it's okay that we don't talk about the most deeply personal things of everything that's going on. We can actually connect about lighter things and it can actually feel connecting. And I think that's a sign that some integration has actually occurred. I don't know if that sentence made any sense. I got distracted by Lethany and drafting off more stuff.